This is part 4, chapter 4 of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, the last chapter. This is the Yoga Sutras translated by Michael Beloved. Segregation accomplished. The mystic skills are demonstrated on the material plane through the various abilities of the varying species of life one may assume. Each species facilitates a particular ability of the subtle body. One may be empowered with a mystic skill by taking drugs which alter the chemistry of a particular form. Skills may be exhibited after pronouncing certain special sounds which affect the constitution of a body. Physical austerities may change a body to make it do what is normally impossible for the particular species. And supernatural linkage of one's mystic attention may affect changes which are unusual for one's body. The transformation from one life form to another, or from one dimension to another, from one existential status to another, occurs by saturation of the subtle body with the energy from that other species, dimension, or status that is to be adopted. The motivating force of the subtle material energy, whereby it appears to inspire the yogi to endeavor for liberation, is not used except for the disintegration of impediments. Hence, it is compared to a farmer who is not the real cause of growth of cultivated plants. A yogi is shown how the various parts of his mind and emotions come into existence because of the involuntary application of his sense of identity to the subtle material nature. The one mento-emotional energy is that which is very much used in numberless different dispersals of energy, which occur as ideas and images arising from memory and sense perception. In that case, only subtle activities which are produced from linkage to higher realities are without harmful emotions, for the others are rooted in the subtle material nature, which always affords reversals. Due to their effective detachment and their ability to push the emerging ideas and images back into the pad of the mind or the territory of the emotions, the cultural activity of the advanced yogins is neither rewarding nor penalizing, but others have 3 types of such action. Subsequently, for those cultural activities of common people, there is development according to corresponding features only, bringing about the manifestation of the tendencies within the mental emotional energy, which causes harmful emotions to be experienced by them. Even though circumstances are separated by status, location, and time, still the impressions which form cultural activities and the resulting memories are of one form and operate on a full-time sequence. Thus, all who are involved in worldly life meet with unfavorable circumstances and are fatigued by favorable occasions, which endorse the vices which bleed out their sensual energies. Those memories and impressions are primeval without a beginning. Hope and desire energies are eternal as well. Thus, the proposal which makes sense recommends a removal of the individual spirit from this unalterable environment. The memories, the impressions, the hope and desire energies exist by what holds them together in terms of what produced them and what they generate, as well as the supportive basis and the lifting influences which reinforce their production. Otherwise, if their causes were not in existence, they would have no register at all. Thus, without supernatural perception and action, one cannot become freed from their influence. Hence, the practice of Kriya Yoga is essential. There is a true form of the past and future, which is denoted by the different courses of their particular characteristics. and one is subjected to the future unless one escapes from time's dominance. The manifestations which are to a greater degree preset are gross or subtle, all depending on their inherent nature. The actual composition of an object is based on the uniqueness of the transformation which produced it, but this can only be viewed supernaturally. Because of a difference in the prejudices of the mental emotional energy of the two persons, separate opinions manifest in their viewing of the very same object. An object is not dependent on the one person's view of it. Otherwise, what would happen if it were not being perceived by that viewer? Would it cease to exist? But we find that this is not so. An object is known or unknown, all depending on the mood and expectation of the particular mental and emotional energy of the viewer in reference to it. Thus, each person must endeavor separately and individually for liberation. The operations of the mind and emotions are always conducted by empowerment taken from the governing spirit. This is because of the spirit being a perpetual energy source. However, the spirit is usually bewildered and is entertained by the usage of his powers. The separation of the mind and emotions are not self-generated by the mind nor the emotions, for these are only capable of being perceived by a real viewer. It is like a viewing instrument which cannot see for itself even though it is useful to the vision of a human being. It cannot by itself execute the focus of itself or something else. If it were possible for the mind or emotions to view themselves, then one mind would perceive another mind independently without involvement with a spirit, or one emotional reserve would become linked with another in the same way. That is not possible. It is an absurd idea. The perceptions of a spirit's intellect occurs when the intellect operates to create an image, but as soon as the image begins to dissolve, it seems as if the intellect itself vanishes. When the mental and emotional forces are quieted, they do not display a prejudiced reaction. Under these conditions, their biases remain dormant. But as soon as there is an activation of the urges, the predispositions are displayed. These are attitudes and responses which were created previously by interactions of the perceiver, his sense energy, and what is perceived. Although the mind and emotions seem to combine to exhibit habits and unique behaviors, still those exhibitions only entertain the perceiver. It is that seer whose radiant energy causes the activation. The mind and emotions use his energy to entertain him. When someone can distinguish between himself and his auxiliary shadow self, his detachment or ability to distance himself from the sensuality empowers him to push away the creative urges which may arise in his psyche. Then a strange but glorious observation is made. One notices that the troublesome and once hard to control mind and emotions begin acting cooperatively, as if to actually please the self and do as told. It exhibits a habit of discrimination, losing its impulsive tendency, and it gravitates towards total separation from the self, a thing which before it was fearful of. However, whenever the self relaxes vigilance, that now cooperative psychology is again forced into the old behaviors, which were based on the old subtle impressions. When the yogi applies an effective method to remove the old impressions, His resulting condition is exactly like that experienced when the mental and emotional afflictions are no longer actuated. The super discrimination, the highest degree of disinterest, is achieved by one who sees no gain in material nature, even in very abstract but potent conditions. Such a person attains an insight whereby he perceives the mental emotional clouds of energy which dictate the laws of responsibility. Subsequently, he can sidestep such obligations. Unless instructed by a divine being, he stops the participation of his auxiliary shadow self, which has the mind and emotions as its chief components. These are restrained from generating further cultural activities, thus ending potential afflictions. Obviously, then, the yogin considers his former insights and feelings to be trivial when compared to his newly earned visions. 3 more verses. Thus, the subtle material nature, having served a useful purpose, its progressive alterations, which sometimes perplexed and sometimes entertained the spirit, come to an end. The once free and own way, aniruddha, in Sanskrit, own way, auxiliary self stops its mental, sensual, and emotional dominance, those rhythmic displays which the self was once forced to enjoy or endure. Last verse. When he sheds off the human type of character, which was a combination of mentality, sensuality, and emotions, he gains a neutrality in reference to the subtle material nature. That separation from his auxiliary self is now established. Thus he discovers his segregated real self, which empowers the auxiliary shadow character. So that's the end of the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali. It's just interesting that in mainstream yoga culture, they say so often that yoga means union. Even Indians say that. When really what we read in here is that it's not about the unification of the mind, body, and spirit, but it's actually a separation of the spirit from the mental and emotional auxiliary shadow self. You, as your mind and emotions in this context, is the shadow self. And the real self is the core self, the Atma, the spiritual self in the center of the head. So I just think that that's interesting. The Sanskrit word for separation that's found in the sutras here is kaivalyam. And I've done a video on why yoga really means separation that you can watch on my channel. Thanks for listening to the Yoga Sutras.